CBS Sports released their top 25 Power 5 head coaches entering 2022, and I just wanted to talk about it and share some of my thoughts. So that's what we're going to be doing for today. If you're new to this channel, or if you've been watching it for a while, but you haven't joined our community yet, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, comment your thoughts on CBS Sports Top 25 and my thoughts down in the comments below, and hit the notification bell so that you can see my content when I go live or just post a standard video. I'm going to be linking two articles down below by CBS Sports, both by Tom Fornelli. One is the actual top 25 ranking. The other is a separate ranking that ranks coaches from the 65th to 26th spot. So 65 to 26 are ranked separately. Those are Power 5 head coaches outside of the top 25, and then the actual top 25. And Tom Fornelli gives about a paragraph of his thoughts on each ranking. They're pretty good reads. They're about 13 to 18 minutes, 13 for the top 25, 18-minute read for the non-top 25 ones. Those will be linked down below. Again, I encourage you to read them. And without further ado, let's get right into it. This is CBS Sports Top 25 Power 5 head coaches entering 2022. And the first thing that actually jumps out to me isn't something that's really, I would say, a critique or anything. I actually find it interesting, and we can talk for maybe a few minutes about this. What's interesting is you look at number 10 through number 15. And to start off that segment, or the section of the top 25, you have three Big 12 head coaches in a row who, if you are to look at their records, and not just even records, but like the talent they have, what they've done at respective programs, all three of them actually have done more with less. You could make an argument that Mike Gundy, Dave Aranda, and Matt Campbell, who number 10, number 11, number 12, three Big 12 coaches in a row is interesting. I think it's kind of funny that the top 25 landed that way. And I think there's an argument to be made that if you're to take those three and just rank those three, who's better, who's worse, there's an argument to be made that Matt Campbell, Dave Aranda, or Mike Gundy could be at the top of that three-person list, the bottom, or the middle. They're interchangeable, I would think. I don't think one is significantly better than the other. Mike Gundy's the longest tenured. He has the most experience. He's also older, and his ceiling is pretty well known. He'll get you a 12-win season occasionally. Again, all of those head coaches do more with less. Dave Aranda's already proven that by going 12-2 and winning the Big 12 in year 2. Aranda's the newest. He jumped insanely high in CBS Sports Top 25. I think he jumped, just looking at his spot, he raised 51 places. He climbed 51 spots. 51. It's an amazing climb. It's probably too high of a climb, to be honest, because he's so new. We don't know what his floor or ceiling is. There's an argument to be made that he hasn't tapped into his full potential yet, which is scary, looking at how he just went 12-2 at Baylor. But we don't know if that was a quote-unquote fluke year or not, even though I don't think it was. And then Matt Campbell, who was ranked ahead of both of those coaches, Mike Gundy and Dave Aranda, this past season for the 2021 Top 25, fell a few places and is now behind them both. But you could make an argument that he is the best out of all of them, and that's because he's at Iowa State, who, if we're being honest, has had the worst history, at least since the 2000s, compared to these two schools. And I would also make an argument that they have the least amount of resources, worst recruiting grounds. Baylor has Texas as a pipeline. They're in the state of Texas. Oklahoma State has Oklahoma. And when you have a coach like Mike Gundy, which just speaks stability and development because he has a good reputation, you can get some recruits that way. But what Matt Campbell has at Iowa State is he has the least amount of resources out of those three, in my opinion, both from recruiting and other aspects relating to the university. And yet here we are, and he went 9-3 in the COVID year. He's developed some NFL talent, Breece Hall, for example. So there's an argument for any of these guys to be ahead of the other. Matt Campbell's also in the middle of the road when it comes to age and experience. Less experienced, has less of a reputation than Mike Gundy does, but he's more tenured and has more experience than, let's say, a Dave Aranda does, at least at being a head coach. And then, to get back to that 13 through 15 spot, you then have 3 Big Ten coaches in a row. And I'm just talking about this because I think it's interesting that you have 3 Big 12 head coaches in a row than 3 Big 10 head coaches in a row. It's just a funny way that works out. We'll talk about some more coaches after. But I find this to be the most interesting segment because I don't like James Franklin. Let's start it off there. But I factor out you could somewhat say, almost bias against him. You look at his reputation, what he's done at Penn State, what he's done at Vanderbilt, and then you look at Kirk Ferentz, Paul Chryst. There's an argument to be made. If you take out my bias, which I think isn't bias, I kind of think it's factual that James Franklin is far worse than Kirk Ferentz or Paul Chryst. But if you take that out and you look at how he won the Big Ten and beat Ohio State more recently than Paul Chryst or Kirk Ferentz did. Ferentz beat them more recently than Franklin, but he didn't win the Big Ten that year. Winning the Big Ten is a whole other game. Winning the Big Ten and beating Ohio State in the same year is quite an achievement, seeing how good Ohio State is today. And James Franklin did that in 2016, and he nearly did those same things in 2017, where he went 11-2, and both of those losses were by a combined, 4 points. So 2 of his losses were by an average of 2 points, which is an insane statistic. So there's an argument to be made that Kirk Ferentz, Paul Chryst, or James Franklin could be at the top or bottom or middle of the road if you're just to take those 3 and rank them individually in a 3-person list. Paul Chryst is done more with less at Wisconsin. Same thing with Kirk Ferentz at Iowa. Kirk Ferentz is tied for first place as the longest current tenured Big Ten head coach. I think his first season was 1999 or 2000, 2001. It was before I was born, which was in the year of 2002. And it's a crazy statistic. And he's not dying. He's not done yet, both in real life and in his coaching cycle, because he just won the Big Ten West outright this past season and went 10-4. Defense, punting, developing NFL tight ends, offensive linemen, defensive players, and occasionally NFL quarterbacks, or at least serviceable backup quarterbacks. Look at C.J. Beathard. Nate Stanley had that same potential. He was drafted in the NFL in one of the later rounds. Iowa, they do more with less. They take farm kids and build them into soldiers and brick walls in the trenches. And Wisconsin arguably does the same thing. And Paul Chryst I think, the 2021 recruiting class, finally got a good recruiting class at Wisconsin. So Paul Chryst, known to do more with less. He had a 13-1 season at Wisconsin, went 9-4 this past season, would have won the West if not losing to a good Minnesota team. And he's finally upped his game in recruiting, at least he did in 2021. And Wisconsin is known for a lot of similar things to Iowa, minus occasionally developing good quarterbacks, tight ends. They're more so known for running backs, if you're to subtract the quarterback position, because they're not good at that, just comparing them to Iowa. But they're better than, let's say, Iowa at developing running backs, because Monte Ball, you also got Jonathan Taylor, you got Melvin Gordon, for example, all 3 amazing running backs. Braylon Allen's probably going to be the next one. So that's Paul Chryst's resume. And then James Franklin, we already talked about the fact that in 2016, beat Ohio State, won the Big Ten, and if he beat Ohio State in 2017, he probably would have done the same thing because that team was darn good. If you're to really factor in recency bias, James Franklin is probably the worst, seeing he's 11-11 since the 2020 campaign. Both seasons, 2020 and 2021, he began ranked in the top 20. being ranked in the top 10 in 2020, and finished with losing records in conference in both years, a losing record outright in 2020, a 7-6 record with a bowl loss in 2021. So Kirk Ferentz, Paul Chryst, I would say they're plateauing. They're doing what they normally do. Wisconsin hasn't made the Big Ten since 2019, which is their longest hiatus from a Big Ten championship game appearance since the Gary Anderson era, which was 2013 to 14. Paul Chryst got him back in 16. But Wisconsin's still doing what Wisconsin does, getting 8, 9 regular season wins, maybe a little more, being a competitive team that develops at the offensive line and running backs. Iowa's doing what they've normally been doing under Kirk Ferentz. In fact, they've had one of his better teams in recent years, going 10-4 this past season, 6-2 in 2020, 10-3 in 2019. So he's had an impressive 3-year run compared to some of his other down years. So it's just interesting, I think, that in the 10 to 15 range, you have several interesting series. First with 3 Big 12 coaches in a row, 3 Big 10, all of whom I think are pretty interchangeable. And a lot of these coaches are known, whether it's from previous schools or current schools, they're known to achieve well, do more with less. And, I myself, of course, have opinions on each of these guys. Like, I don't think James Franklin myself should be anywhere near the top 15. I don't even think he's currently top 25. But this ranking also factors in past achievements. There's a reason that Jimbo Fisher's at number 5. National championships, achievements, the conference you're in, and how you've performed in it obviously matter here. I'm someone who I like the past. The past matters, but college football is about the present and the future, especially in a time like the NIL era, where being just immediately able to adapt and looking toward the future is so important, especially in a time like this. But past achievements are important as well. And CBS Sports obviously recognizes that by placing Jimbo Fisher, James Franklin, other head coaches as well in this list. I would say Jim Harbaugh at number 9, even though he did do really well in 2021. Some of that being there is from his reputation in the NFL and Stanford. Because if you're to take those out of the way and just look at his Michigan tenure, would one 12-2 season really make him a top 10 coach nationally? Like immediately after a 2-4 year in 2020, a 9-4 year in 2019? Maybe it would, but I don't know. I think that CBS Sports likes to put a lot of the past into this list, which is why it's so shocking to see like a Dave Aranda at 11, because he's only been a head coach for 2 years. If he's up there at number 11, I'm shocked that Mel Tucker isn't in the top 20. Let's talk about the 20 to 25 range here for a minute. So first and foremost, you have Mack Brown at 20. Don't worry, we'll get to Mel Tucker in a few minutes, and then talk a little bit about the rest of the list. I really don't want to spend a lot of time on the top 10 because they're all known, and there's really good reasons for all of them to be in the top 10. I'm going to go 20 to 25, talk about some of the other areas too. And 17, or rather 16 through 20, that, 10 to 20 part that we didn't talk about, those make sense too. All of those guys, really the 10 to 20 range, outside of, I would say, Mario Cristobal and Mack Brown, all of those guys, and, you probably, exclude James Franklin because of how good he's recruited in recent history. But most of those guys do more with less. In the top 10, outside of Kyle Whittingham, are mostly solid recruiters, well, more so solid coaches, elite recruiters, maybe elite coaches as well. That's just how I look at this list. Mack Brown at number 20, I think, is interesting. And he dropped a few places. He cracked the top 10 after appearing in the Orange Bowl and I think having an 8-4 record in the COVID year. He dropped a lot of spots, more than 10, after having a 7-6 campaign this past season, losing to South Carolina. Maybe it was a 6-7. I think it was a 6-7 record, maybe. But he lost to South Carolina in the Duke's Mayo Bowl, which would be probably the most humiliating bowl to lose in. Mack Brown has brought in some insanely talented recruiting classes over the past few years. He's old. He's had nothing to show for those recruiting classes. And despite having a national title to his name, which definitely factors into where he is as a head coach, that was in 2005. This is my problem with weighing too much on the past. The game now is not where it was at in 2005. It isn't. In fact, with how NIL is, the game now isn't even where it was in 2020. It wasn't. I know 2020 for some college football fans felt like yesterday. The game's different now. Times change fast. And having Mack Brown in 20, I think, is kind of asinine. He's in front of Pat Fitzgerald, PJ Fleck, Mel Tucker, Dave Doran, Sam Pittman, all of whom have done more with less star talent than Mack Brown. All of them. Literally all of them. Sam Pittman, for example, took over a dumpster fire. Vintage Chad Morris, Arkansas, which was probably the worst Power 5 program outside of maybe Rutgers. He took that over and in 2 years had them going 9-4, competing with Alabama. They were competitive in every loss except for the Georgia one and maybe to a certain degree the Auburn one. They were a darn good team this last year, and I think they're going to be even better in 2022. Pat Fitzgerald, classic guy that does more with less. He probably has the most academic restrictions out of all the coaches in this top 25, and yet he's found a way to win the Big Ten West twice. He's developed NFL talent. He's a solid X's and O's coach, possibly the best X's and O's coach in the Big Ten. And because of the restrictions placed upon him by the university, we don't even know how good of a recruiter he is, in my opinion, because of those hefty restrictions that he has. But he did get Peter Skornowski, who I think 24/7 Sports ranked as a 5-star. And he's a really impressive and talented young man. So that, I guess, that would probably speak to Pat Fitzgerald's ability to recruit and identify talent as well. PJ Fleck, Mel Tucker, I think both of those are pretty similar guys. Mel Tucker's the better recruiter, but both are mostly culture room, locker room building guys. Difference is Mel Tucker has a lot more resources and a bigger name at Michigan State, and PJ Fleck is at Minnesota. And PJ Fleck has done the best at Minnesota since coaches in the early 1900s. Minnesota has not been good for so long, and now they're constantly in the conversation to be in the top 25 because of what PJ Fleck has done with, again, less than a coach like Mack Brown has, for example. Same thing with Mel Tucker, who's been known to be the king of the transfer portal. What a phenomenal job he's done at Michigan State. I'm surprised, again, that he's not higher. Dave Aranda being at number 11 is impressive. Mel Tucker being at number 24. That's a big gap between those two. Mel Tucker plays in the tougher conference, arguably, and I would say factually too, if you look at the rankings, statistics, the fact that, Michigan, Ohio State, etc., whatever, all of those guys in there. It's also the most talented conference too. Texas and Oklahoma's talent combined is nowhere near Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State's talent combined. All those 5 schools consistently get top 15 recruiting classes. And then Dave Doran, of course, look at what he's done at NC State. Constant 9-win seasons, 8-9-win seasons, just beat Clemson this past season. He doesn't recruit in the top 15 either. Again, more with less. Describes most of the 20 to 25 range, excluding Mack Brown, who, again, I really don't think should be here. Mark Stoops, Dave Clawson, Lane Kiffin, pretty similar to that 20 to 25 list. They do more with less. Lane Kiffin is known to be, I would say, especially after this season, more of a transfer portal guy than a recruiter. Dave Clawson's at Wake Forest, and we all know that Wake Forest gets probably top 40, top 50 recruiting classes, and he's gotten eight 8 wins out of them most years, just got 11 wins out of them and an appearance in the ACC title game this past season. Mark Stoops, 8-10 win guy, has had 2 10-win seasons at Kentucky. That deserves some kind of award. I don't know what kind of award, but that deserves an award. Mario Cristobal, I'd say, would be in a similar category to Mac Brown. More similar, but he deserves to be in the top 25 list. He rebuilt Oregon from numerous disaster attempts. Mark Helfrich, for example, he led the program down a dark path. Willie Taggart got in there for a year and then dipped. That always hurts a program. Mario Cristobal came in. He instilled toughness. He tried to make Oregon into, I would say, an older style Alabama team. Brought in offensive coordinator Joe Moorhead. Won the Pac-12 twice. Developed Justin Herbert as well. And C.J. Verdell and Travis Dye, who are among the nation's top running backs, in my opinion. Mario Cristobal, he can recruit, he's gotten high talent, he can command a locker room and build a great culture, and he's also developed with that. Now, I know he hasn't reached the playoff or won in the playoff, but that's very hard to do. He's still a good coach regardless. And then the top 10, we already talked about Mike Gundy. But I would say the top 10 overall is pretty accurate. Jimbo Fisher would be the one that I would come closest to disagreeing with, but at the same time, he's still a pretty good head coach. He's gotten 8 wins every year at minimum at Texas A&M, and in the 2020 season, he only had 1 loss to the national champion Alabama, finished number 4 in the nation, and he's recruited very well, just signed the number 1 recruiting class by a mile in 2022 as well, so he can recruit well. He won a national championship at Florida State. All of the others, Jim Harbaugh, Kyle Whittingham, Brian Kelly, Ryan Day, Lincoln Riley, Dabo Swinney, Kirby Smart, and Nick Saban, I would say all of those guys are pretty accurately ranked. Kyle Whittingham does more with less, which is a common theme in this top 25. I think it's a valuable trait, and CBS Sports agrees as well. Jim Harbaugh, Brian Kelly, I would say those two are pretty similar. They don't have elite talent or can't recruit at an elite level like a lot of these other guys in the top 10 can, but they still recruit at a great level, so they get more than a lot of these other coaches ranked in the top 25. They can still develop and are proven to develop a lot of NFL talent. They have had their struggles in big games against top 10 opponents, but they're still overall solid head coaches. And if after the jobs they've done in 2021, and if you look at Brian Kelly, the job he's done since his disaster season, his 4-8 season in 2016, they are top 10 head coaches, I think. And then Ryan Day, Lincoln Riley, Dabo Swinney, Kirby Smart, and Nick Saban. I would say those should compose of the top 5, would be my opinion. I would say Ryan Day over Jimbo Fisher, and that top 5 would be pretty ideal. All those guys can recruit an elite level. They've coached at elite levels. Lincoln Riley and Ryan Day should be lower than Saban, Smart, and Swinney since they haven't won national titles. Saban should obviously be 1, and there's a debate to have between who should be number 2. Kirby, his program's trending in a more upward direction than Clemson, it seems, but Clemson and Dabo Swinney by a mile have had more success, winning 2 national titles, being 500 against Nick Saban, where I think Smart is 1-4 or 1-5. Those are my thoughts on CBS Sports Top 25. I took much longer on some coaches and segments than others, but I took longer on the parts that interested me most, and in this instance, the number 10 through number 15, and the spots just around number 25, so 20 through 25, interested me the most. Again, answer down below what you thought of this video and what you think of this top 25. My biggest takeaway is that tenure and experience matter, because you look at newer head coaches who are just popping up, like Mel Tucker, for example, the phenomenal job he's done, and he's still number 24. Dave Aranda, 12-2 record, winning the Big 12. He's not in the top 10. Tenure is obviously most important. CBS Sports does not want to fall into any kind of major recency bias trap. Look at Sam Pittman at 22 as well. Tenure certainly matters. Same with, I would say, same heavily with recruiting and getting double-digit win seasons, which is obvious to being ranked very high, but those are just some takeaways here. So again, if you like this video, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.